So welcome and thank you for joining the City Parks Alliance for this webinar today. We're going to be exploring how to tap into and leverage climate mitigation and disaster relief funds to build more resilient green spaces and communities. I'm Lisa McNeely, the Director of Sustainability for the City of Baltimore, and I'm going to be moderating the discussion. If you're interested in continuing education credits for this webinar for AICP, watch for a follow-up email in the next 2 days with instructions on how to claim your credits. On behalf of the City Parks Alliance, we'd like to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for their sponsorship of the 2020 funding webinar series. Every day, we're faced with the reality that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more severe, from devastating wildfires in the West to more frequent sunny day flooding events and 100-year storms in many parts of the country. It's clear that climate change is one of the biggest challenges we face today. While these issues demand a large-scale and coordinated approach to address, parks and green spaces that are designed for resilience can play a crucial role in preventing and mitigating the effects of extreme heat, flooding, wildfires, and other climate change events. Being able to navigate and access funding sources for this work will be increasingly important. Today, we're going to hear from 3 speakers at 2 different agencies who will talk about the sources they've utilized to fund projects that increase resilience, including how to navigate these opportunities. They'll also discuss how they've leveraged funding to secure additional money from other sources and how they maximized impact by partnering with other groups and engaging the community. With us today are Robert Doyle, General Manager of the East Bay Regional Park District in Oakland, California, Lisa LaRocque, Sustainability Officer for the City of Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Kathy Matthews, Landscape Architect at the Parks and Recs Department, also with the City of Las Cruces, New Mexico. So we'll hear from all 3 of our presentations before we're moving into the Q&A. But just before we get started, to ensure we can respond to everyone as questions or technical difficulties arise, just want to have some tips. If you want to ask a question, click the questions icon on your screen, type the question in the box and hit send. Feel free to send questions throughout the presentation. Just know that we're probably holding most of them or all of them until the end. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it into the question box and send it to us, and hopefully somebody besides me will help you with it. And if you miss something, don't worry. Links to the presentations, the recording, and related resources will be emailed to all registrants. So let's get started. And Bob, we're going to begin with you. You're on mute, I think, Bob.
There we go. And I really have, let me get full screen. There, oops. I'll get there in a sec. There we go. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone from California. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I hope that everyone is well and getting through the COVID-19 crisis as best as possible. It's really a huge challenge for everyone. So in California, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with FEMA and natural disasters. And we not only have the incredibly
Bob, can I interrupt for just a second? I think you're not, we're not able to see your slides at this point.
Okay, it's showing full screen on, here we go.
Okay.
How's, are we there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. In California, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with dealing with natural disasters. We have earthquakes, we have floods, and now we have the most devastating fires in American history, with 4 million acres being in flames, and hopefully trying to get those under control in California. It's really a devastating season. So the East Bay Regional Park District was created in 1934. We have the honor of being a partnership in that original plan with the Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. and the National Park Service. Both contributed to that early plan for a 10,000 acre reserve system in the East Bay Hills. We are about 1/3 of the population in the 9 million population of the Bay Area. And today we have 73 parks and 125,000 acres of public lands, over 1,500 miles of trails throughout the East Bay, both bicycle trails and natural hiking trails that really do connect throughout the region and to the parks and to the communities. We have 33 cities in the East Bay. It is a very urban system, but it has a lot of natural and connected open space with very valuable wildlife corridors and habitat. We have 1,000 employees, and we are the largest employer of summer youth jobs in normal seasons, not this season with COVID, unfortunately. We have a major environmental education program, about 2.8 million residents in the East Bay and 25 million annual visitors. It is 2 full counties in the state county system. In 1991, we had a devastating fire in the Oakland Hills, east of San Francisco. On that photo, you can see a ridgeline there. That's where all the ridgeline parks are. 3,000 houses burnt down and 29 souls were lost. At that time, it was the third largest and most devastating loss in California's history. Today, it is dwarfed, it is eclipsed by over 4 million acres of fires in California. We also had in 2017, we had a tremendous year of storm damage, really damaging park property. We had 117 storm recovery projects, about $8 to $10 million in damage. 29 park sites, 29 storm recovery projects completed already, and 58 FEMA projects. So my focus today really is on navigating the FEMA process and how you can do your best to work with FEMA and the other regulatory agencies and the communities to be able to receive those funds. This is an example of an entire park flooded at a reservoir. You can see the parking lot up above, but those are the facilities floating around in that storm damage. Storm damage also creates a lot of other blowouts of culverts, landslides. California is full of soil that wants to move around. And so when we have these type of really wet winters, we can get a lot of damage to the park systems. We lose roads. And I think the real story here is to communicate with the FEMA regional office to make sure you understand the process. This is a federal agency dealing with lots of other problems, as you know, across the nation. So they want to be helpful, but you have to do the hard work to make sure you tag all the bases and do the proper advocacy. And I will emphasize advocacy many times. And this is kind of an example of what was required in the storm recovery. So about $10 million total, 6.8 million, about 75% was FEMA funding, and we had to match that with state, which is Cal OES Emergency Office, and our own match. You still have to provide a match, and that's a big challenge to a lot of public park agencies, but that's a requirement. We did get insurance recovery, and we put about $1 million of our general fund into that initial work. But in California, the real story is fires. We had one event in August 23rd, and you can see on the right of that picture, that was lightning strikes across California, including just an incredible amount of fires that got out of control. And then even after that, without the lightning, we had additional fires throughout the season. And what climate change has really done is created an environment of drier summers, longer fire season. Our fire season used to be open, used to be closed by August. Today, it's gone all the way into November. So a huge extension of the fire season in California, and a tremendous challenge for agencies, and particularly CAL FIRE and our own firefighters at our district. We have our own firefighting department of full-time firefighters. So this is an example of the environment. This is lightning strikes that hit some of our beautiful parks. Some of these parks are 5,000 to 10,000 acres in size, so they're very rugged, wilderness type California landscape, some of the most beautiful landscape in California. And one of the things that we have been able to do is to go to the public and ask for help. That's really critical because you need matching money to get the state and federal emergency funds. So we went to the voters and asked them to pay for a parcel tax, about $12 a year, very small. And because of the population size of the district, we were able to get about $4 million a year. And the priority of that funding was for firefighting, including that's our helicopter for firefighting in the upper left. And in the far right, you have our helicopter working with the CAL FIRE helicopter. And what we can do is get there faster, particularly if the state forestry is fighting other fires in the state. So it really is a critical part of that. We also did park improvements for public access, for urban access and trails as part of that measure. It received an 86% vote. In California, we cannot pass a tax unless it's a 2/3 positive vote of the public. And one of the major elements of that measure and of our FEMA and Cal OES funding is fuel management. So we have young crews, kind of like back to the, see the blue hat on the right with the CCC, that's the California Conservation Corps. And on the left are our firefighting crews doing fuel management. We have a major element because of the nature of the landscape in California, grassland and woodland intermix. We use goats, we use sheep, and we use cattle to reduce the fuel load, which is absolutely critical. In California, much of the land that's going up in flames, absent of the federal ownership, which is about 60% of the land in California. So the federal government owns and is responsible for a lot of that fuel management. But in the publicly owned parklands, most of that's owned by the public agencies such as ourselves. And we have a landscape of intermixed grassland that has to be reduced in that fuel load, and allows firefighters to be able to fight a safe fire with a fire buffer and a safe distancing to be able to get the equipment and people safely in to deal with fires. Control burns are a critical element, and we have not done enough of that in California. It's very clear. The Smokey the Bear theme of no fires is actually created a situation where about 100 years of undergrowth in the forest, both public and private, that have grown back and have not been thinned. There is no commercial value to the brush, and the vegetation has to be removed. The commercial value is really in the large trees, and most people really want to protect those. They created a shaded environment, and they are a source of important wood product. We also have planted environment in the urban interface. These are eucalyptus trees from Australia, and they were planted in the 1920s and 30s as watershed species and hopeful timber product, and it was a failure. So we're stuck with thinning these forests. They sprout, as you can see the way that is if they're cut down. So managing planted eucalyptus forests is a really critical thing around the Bay Area and in California. Paperwork. So it's really important that both you work with the regional office and staff of FEMA and Cal OES to make sure you've got a checklist that you don't make any mistakes. If you make a mistake or submit the wrong paperwork, you could start over or lose your opportunity to get these funding. Paperwork communication is really critical with these federal funding. We also have a work list describing the projects. Once you describe and apply for that project, you have to adhere to it. You cannot add to it. You can't do what's called a betterment. FEMA's paying to fix what's broken. They're not paying, unfortunately, for a climate resistant or future improvement of the park. But those fundings are absolutely essential to get to repair damage or to deal with these fires. Cal OES has also the paperwork. You have to what's eligible, hazard mitigation grant program. And I want to talk about the hazard mitigation grant program because even though you are responding to a major declared federal and state disaster to get emergency funding, a percentage of those funds is available in each event that can return to FEMA for specific use on pre and post mitigation. What's important about that is that allows you actually to take a percentage of the FEMA money and use that to actually in the future address thinning of forests. We're receiving lots of money right now from FEMA, and it comes out of that pot of the original FEMA funding. And I think it's like 2 to 5%. I think it's only 2%. But you need to make sure that you're aware of those emergencies and you put in a letter of intent to say, we have a project for mitigating future impacts. We would like to apply for a portion of that set aside in FEMA. If you miss that window, you are not eligible. It's a fairly simple, it's a few pages, but it's not that complicated, but you have to pay attention. It does not have to be an emergency in your immediate area. It can be somewhere else in California, for example, that you can receive some funds to do pre and post mitigation for that type of disaster. It's a very smart investment by FEMA, and it's really appreciated. So the history here, just to give you the scale, mitigation is about $8 million, preparation, 95,000, recovery is about 2 million. So this is the different types of funding we have received from FEMA. It's a total of 29, almost $30 million that we have received in disaster relief and post and pre-mitigation preparedness for the future. So it's a significant amount of money, but you have to also be able to address all those issues. So quickly, some of the lessons we've learned is really advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. Meet with your federal legislative office. Let them know what your situation is. Let them know what you're doing to be responsible. Do you have a plan? Do you have the resources in your agency to get this work done, to be shovel ready when it happens? Meet with the FEMA regional office and staff, including site visits to show them. Do all the paperwork accurately. Don't miss deadlines. Make sure you adhere to all federal and state environmental regulations. And the important issue there is in California and in the nation, we have endangered species under NEPA and CEQA. And those agencies certainly are concerned about these disasters, but their responsibility is for the wildlife. So you have to tag all the boxes to make sure you're mitigating impacts, that you're following all the regulations, because that can stop or delay your project. And you have to address any legal or public opposition. Some of these projects, including fuel breaks, including vegetation management, can have opposition from the adjacent neighbors in that urban interface who don't want those trees cut down. So we have actually had litigation from groups who did not want to see the fuel program move forward. Never begin a project until you have your approvals. That could set you back with the absolute chance of losing the funding. And you have a long time to do this process. The 91 fire that I showed earlier with the 3,000 houses that were lost, the houses have been rebuilt, but we still are working on FEMA projects that long ago because we had litigation, we had controversy in some areas, and we had mitigation that was required to get all of those approvals. Those are state and federal approvals. So memories are short. 10 years later, people say, what are you doing? And they could go to FEMA and oppose your project. Again, that has happened in the urban interface. And people just move in, and the people who were lost their homes are gone, and you have a whole different environment you have to work with publicly. So communication, public relations are absolutely important to get public support. FEMA doesn't like controversy. They do not like to be, with so much going on nationally, really bogged down in some project in one state or one area. So that's important. And again, advocacy is essential. Meet with your legislators, meet with the local offices, and communicate well with everyone. So these are our lessons learned. I think this material is available, but your paperwork And examples we have here are very valuable. Some are from the agencies, some are our own that we developed to make sure we've tagged all the bases. So that's my presentation, and I hope it's helpful. Unfortunately, what we really need is a climate army dealing with a much bigger role to pre-address and mitigate the impacts of climate change. This is a FEMA emergency program. They're doing their best, but it's not going to solve all the problems that we need to address these incredibly storm and weather-driven events because of climate change. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Bob. So sorry. No, sorry. I had technical problems there. My apologies. Thanks, Bob. That was a really great overview of your projects, as well as how you can navigate the funding opportunities, especially such an important funder like FEMA. So we're next going to hear about the resilience work that's being done in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So Lisa and Kathy, I hope you're all set to get started.
I'm just getting set up here. I'm trying to share my screen.
And to go back a few?
Yeah, I apologize. Let me start back at the beginning. There we go.
Okay, that'll work. Well, thank you, Lisa, and everyone for attending. My name is Lisa LaRock. I'm the sustainability for the office, I'm the sustainability office for the city of Las Cruces, and Kathy Matthews will also be joining. She's a landscape architect. Robert's done a great job explaining large-scale efforts, and this second presentation will give a more local perspective. Environmental conditions are important considerations for all of us in near-term planning, and so I'd like to share what Las Cruces is doing, what Las Cruces environment is like. We are in the Chihuahuan Desert in the southern border of the U.S., and we expect less than 10 inches of rain a year, and supplemental irrigation has been a given. Even though the area supports trees, we know it takes work to reestablish them. And as a sustainability officer for the city, I have a special twist on planning. I try to bring in the consideration of how climate change impacts are going to be affecting the work that we do. And so I'm going to be, in the next 10 minutes, I will be sharing what I've learned about mitigation work and where to get data collection and project funding. And then I'll turn it over to Kathy to tell you more about the specifics of a project that we're involved with. Next slide. So here is what I tell our parks and staff and other staff. Those environmental conditions that you are used to dealing with are about to go on steroids. In the case of Las Cruces, extended heat events and other drought will become increasing challenges in our design and management decisions. Wind and dust will complicate the problems, and fire and floods may add an additional shock to our system. I say these things with confidence because we've worked with a group of climatologists who has taken a deep dive into exploring these potential issues. Next slide. So to begin, it all started with a simple travel scholarship to the National Adaptation Forum. And there I got connected with academic and NGO, non-governmental organization climate specialists that were looking for cities to partner with. And this team of people met in Las Cruces to determine what weather events had historically caused infrastructure and other system failures. And then the climatologists projected the frequency of these events into the future. And this modeling effort helped identify what I needed to prioritize, since none of us have an endless source of money. Their work in helping us do this modeling is considered about $80,000 worth of in-kind service, plus they gave us a $15,000 graph. This graph illustrates how we're already experiencing a symptom of climate change, extreme heat, and its projected rise. The horizontal axis tracks from 1950 to 2100, and the vertical axis shows you the number of weeks we're projecting this experience. You can see from this data that I can raise people's attention by showing you that we're already have extreme heat 5 weeks currently. By 2050, we'll expect 2 months of that to be extreme heat events. And by the end of the century, 2 out of 3 of our months will be with temperatures over 105. We'll have similar temperatures as Phoenix, but the question is, will we have the appropriate park design, buildings, and infrastructure? And who should we be looking to be able to mitigate any of the problems that we can see happening? Next slide, please. With the higher temperatures, evaporation increases. Moisture is transported elsewhere. Climatologists studying in the Southwest say that for every degree Celsius that it increases, there'll be a 10% decrease in water flow. By the end of the century, we're going to expect a 5-degree increase in temperatures, and that means we're going to lose 50% of our water. And this is a huge impact on the agricultural community that relies on 90% of the surface water. But the city relies on groundwater supplies, and infiltration and recharge are important in our supplies. So with our concerns about water, we used $15,000 of the dollars that we got from the study that I just described to you for a grant, and where we looked at where we could put in green infrastructure to benefit the city. With heat and storms, storms will be heavier at times. We can expect over 2 to 3 inches downfalls in one day. And our traditional methods of running water down the streets, as you can see on the right-hand picture, and sending it off to retention ponds, only will allow, after runoff and evapotranspiration, will only allow about 15% of the stormwater to infiltrate the ground. And if we were to use green infrastructure, stormwater could be used for beneficial purposes through the city, directing water to permeable surfaces to support shade trees and increase infiltration from 15% to 50%. And learning this, the Sustainability Office and the landscape architect invested just $20,000 in a pilot project to harvest stormwater from the adjacent parking lot you can see in the right-hand photo. And both of these photos right here were taken next to each other and clearly illustrate the differences and advantages and disadvantages of gray versus green infrastructure. Next slide. Our network with climate academicians and nonprofits extended to agencies. We wanted a more granular look at how urban heat was impacting different areas in the city. So we were involved in 2 projects, one with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, in projects where we studied urban heat. The photo on your left shows a project that we did with NOAA, where they provided us $12,000 of in-kind support to run a citizen science study of ambient temperatures at 6 a.m., 3 p.m., and 7 p.m. The map on the left shows the urban core, the center of our city, the infill area at 3 p.m., and you can see that the asphalt and concrete and other impervious surfaces are raising their temperatures to 111 degrees Fahrenheit, as indicated by the red area, while other areas in yellow and white are not as burdened by the urban heat. And so the city superimposed green dotted lines to indicate planned bike and pedestrian routes as part of its active transportation plan. And if we need to prioritize who is being impacted, the red areas can give us help. Having both the active transportation plan and the heat data expand the types of grants that we can apply for and provide a compelling argument on why we should be funded. The two GIS figures on the right come from NASA, the NASA Development Grant Program. For a summer, NASA paid 6 graduate students from leading universities and 2 professors about $80,000 to work on a project exclusively for Las Cruces. I didn't have to write a grant, work through finance, submit invoices, or anything. These GIS maps were designed to describe socioeconomic characteristics by adding a second translucent layer. If a census block were more vulnerable, seniors and children under 5 were more vulnerable because they had seniors and children under 5 than the median of the city. The map translucent color would become red or orange, and it's added to the map. So you can see that the red areas on the top photo show where there's problems, and it's mostly on the east side. And you could then, we imposed another layer and we looked at health indicators, and there we saw that the west side had particular problems with asthma and other concerns related to health. So that really makes us look at the type of pollen of trees that we plant there, of windbreaks, and other conditions that are important for people with health problems. Again, another chance to be able to look for grants in different fields. Next slide, please. Extreme heat can also be felt inside the home. 42% of the city core or infill area is made up of homes constructed before 1970. Many of these homes are made of cinder block, are poorly insulated with single pane windows, and have inadequate HVAC systems. These homes rely on evaporative coolers that draw air through a wet filter. Now, folks of you in humid areas are saying wet, but if you do have humidity over 30%, these evaporative coolers can only reduce home temperatures by approximately 10 degrees. In other words, during our 107-degree heat events this summer, homes will only be cooled to the mid to high 90s. So having more impervious surfaces and parks is an important strategy to cool this area. All the spatial data needed to be matched with with some social analysis. And we wanted to understand the impacts of seniors and young kids and chronically ill and athletes and outside workers, how they felt. So we got another grant from the Funders Network Partners for Places program that provided a one-to-one match with local community foundations. And we received $50,000 to run a neighborhood survey and support a local community group to engage with the neighborhood. This is especially important since we learned that when we asked how many neighbors you could call for help, 39% said none and 40 said 1 to 2. Knowing your neighbors is a critical factor in extreme weather events. We also learned many other things, but we knew we needed to pilot a project at the neighborhood level. And a colleague told me about a community development block grant for $200,000 that required a match. And I went to our public works and got that match using the stormwater funds. So we had $500,000 for this demonstration project that we call the Nevada Cool Corridor Project. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathy now to explain the details of that.
Thank you, Lisa. So with the notion of the cool corridor, the idea was to build on the information that Lisa had gathered regarding the urban heat island effect in this particular neighborhood and the impact that stressor was going to have on people living in that neighborhood. The idea was to create a pilot project that could demonstrate our ability to harvest stormwater and to create cooling effects of trees utilizing that stormwater. We partnered with a number of people in the community, a number of community organizations, as well as different departments throughout the city on this pilot project to improve the streets and provide an example, a sample of how to use green infrastructure to make these kinds of improvements, harvest stormwater, and better the environment for the people in the neighborhood. Our cool corridor consisted of developing these chicanes or bump outs that intercepted the stormwater as it flowed down the street in the curb and gutter, and make use of that water to grow trees and plants to create shade and to experience the cooling and other benefits of trees within the environment. So through the planning and design process, we built on the notions of increasing the tree canopy, harvesting that stormwater, utilizing native plants that could survive periods of drought and periods of inundation, and to use those benefits to provide the additional benefit of cooling the neighborhood. As Lisa mentioned, we used CDBG funding, community development block grant funding, in conjunction with our flood water management funding. And we partnered with the community, with members of the community, and actively sought input from the neighbors to make these design decisions along this corridor, to place these chicanes where they would have maximum benefit and minimum impacts on things like parking, access to driveways, and interference with existing utilities. So the final product, which we've just recently completed, installed these chicanes along Nevada Avenue, planted native trees, native grasses, and native shrubs in these chicanes where they could actually actively utilize the stormwater that does flow into these areas. The idea is that we will improve the urban heat island effect in the neighborhood, improve the pedestrian environment by creating shaded areas that will make the sidewalks more conducive to people actually walking instead of driving, and increase the neighborhood resilience by soliciting input from the neighbors, by actively working with folks in the neighborhood to determine where the chicanes should be placed, and engaging with the neighbors in a group setting. The project actively increased the neighborhood resilience also. And with that, I will turn it back over to Lisa.
Thanks, Kathy.
Great.
This is just a
Sorry,
Lisa. Well, this is just a quick summary of our lessons learned. You can see our funding was a patchwork of different projects that we did, but they all worked together to bring our message home. Kathy, next slide. And there are several, next slide. There are several products that we got from this effort. We were able to get transportation to, next slide, transportation to the event. We, to where I met these people, we got climate modeling done. We got $15,000 for a rain cistern. We got 2 urban heat studies. We had money for the community development block grant and flood money, stormwater money to build that demonstration project. We were able to have a social element to the project, and we've also increased our credibility a lot. And so those are all areas that have been very fruitful for us to continue to get funding and support and positive notice. So if Kathy can move to the last slides about lessons learned. In summary, keep going. I just wanted This is the list of outcomes I was just telling you about. And then the lessons learned are, there's a lot of people to partner with. There's academics and nonprofits and agencies that all can throw in money. You don't always have to write the grant yourself. And collecting data and being able to tell your story is really important. It adds a lot of credibility. When you hear about great ideas, tuck them away and know that they'll be ready when you do have the opportunity for a chunk of money, and continue to watch for those small opportunities that move you another step in the direction. And also address several concerns together. I think one of the biggest outcomes for us as a city is that a lot of departments now have come together to be able to understand that this is an effort that includes all of us. And planning ahead and avoiding these problems with climate change that we're already predicting is an important role for all of us. So thank you very much. Thanks, Kathy. And now, Lisa, we're done.
So thanks to you both. It's really great to hear the work that you all have been doing and all the different sources of funding that you were able to pull together to mitigate climate change, and the emphasis on community engagement. So we're going to switch over to some audience Q&A. The good news is there's quite a few questions that have already come in. I'm going to start with one that's kind of a big picture. So Bob, I'm going to call on you first. So just listen in. So how would you describe what resilience means in the communities where you work? And what has been your process to learn how residents experience it so it can be addressed?
Well, for the East Bay Regional Park District, that's a great question for everybody, but for us specifically, I go back to the need for education and communication. The district's in probably a different position than many agencies because we're large enough to do annual polling in our budget. So we ask a lot of those questions in polling. And I would say that resilience is still on the leading edge of the debate. What one person's resilience may not be the same to others. In our case, what we're doing on fires, the resilience is thinning forests, creating fuel breaks. We're not going to stop fires. Fires in California are a part of nature, historically in this landscape, all the way back to the indigenous people. But you can make communities more resilient by having that urban interface managed. People need defensible space around their property. They agree with that, and our polling shows that. But we really need to be able to look at more and more tools to make really defensible space, because there's going to continue to be fires. On floods, it's really looking at how you design those parks, that that you start moving things up gradient. You start, don't put your facilities in the lowland that might flood, try to move them up. That's not always possible. But if a picnic area or a lawn area floods, that's very, very achievable to restore. Buildings, on the other hand, get ruined by flooding because of the impacts, most damage and mold and things like that. So I think resilience is the future. I think the example of our other panelists, really great examples on water control. We've got to design things differently, and we have to work with engineers and lawyers and all those people to come up with solutions that people aren't used to. And we can do it. The tools are there, but it takes a much, much larger investment and much, much more public support to do that.
Kathy or Lisa?
Lisa?
I'll take this one. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I agree with Robert. It's the idea of bouncing back, but and so the strategies of using upstream strategies of trying to mitigate problems before they become more serious problems is super important. So pervious surfaces, parks, trees, harvesting stormwater. But I think an important lesson of humility for us is that nature's got some amazing services, and we need to work with it instead of against it. And I think that will really help us learn the way to become more resilient.
I have to absolutely agree. We need to make use of the resources we're given. In our instances, that's stormwater, and instead of treating it as waste product, we need to use it to increase the shade, increase the native plants, decrease the amount of asphalt that we've got in our cities, to realize those multiple benefits. And also with regard to resilience and this particular project and others recently, another aspect of resilience, of course, is the community input. Part of the success of these projects or the failure of these projects is the public buy-in, not just public buy-in, but the public engagement and the public knowledge, harvesting that public knowledge about how to make these projects work, make them work with real people's lives, and to find ways to integrate these kinds of projects into everyday people's lives with their input.
Great. So kind of coming off of what Lisa and Kathy, or all of you all sort of just responded, another question was, how are you preparing green infrastructure priorities for the forthcoming stimulus and infrastructure funding opportunities? So is there any, tidbits you can share, or any sort of great ideas that you've already had about kind of that planning? Lisa, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Well, one of the things that I alluded to was we have an active transportation plan where we're trying to encourage more bicycling and pedestrian use. But again, it's super hot much of the year, and so those areas that are main active routes, we want to put cool corridors on those, and so this was a chance for us to figure out how to do that. And then an earlier project where we got the $15,000, we identified the impact of doing more green infrastructure in parking lots, around retention ponds, in parks themselves. And those are some of the ones that I can think of. But funding issue is definitely one we have to roll our sleeves up on.
Great.
So I would just respond briefly that more and more with all the programs, that includes the transportation grants on the federal level called BUILD. And to address the impacts of climate change, we need to do not only be resilient, we also need to be proactive. And the district has been very successful in getting the transportation money to build and connect our trail system to transportation hubs, mass transit bus routes. We have the Bay Area BART. And so if you can be shovel ready, if you can get the public support behind you so you get rid of controversy and address those real concerns, you need to be shovel ready for these grants. And when they come, and we're very hopeful now with the administration that recognizes climate change, that there will be funding, but you need to be ready. You need to be shovel ready.
So Bob, I'm going to put you on the spot again with another question. So maintenance of these projects got raised, and I think this is often an issue. And so I'm wondering if you could expand, whether you have shovel-ready projects or just even for the ones you've already done, how you work to ensure that they get maintained, and whether there are funds that are available for that kind of work. And we're going to ask Las Cruces that. I want to see if Las Cruces can chime in on that too.
Yeah, the fundamental responsibility of the East Bay Regional Park District is to maintain safe and have well-maintained parks. But when you're looking at an 86-year-old park system or a 150-year-old park system, many cities in the state park system are very old, that infrastructure is really getting ancient. And if you want to be relevant for public support, you need to give them a good experience. So we are funding the maintenance as a very high priority, including infrastructure in the parks. This is park infrastructure. It's not, highways, but it's park infrastructure. And that's part of our base budget that we get to run the park system. So the mitigation that we get for fires and floods and things like that, that would have taken away the money to maintain the park. So these other sources of funds are actually helping because they're improving the viability of that structure by making it more resilient. And so if you have more resilient development, exactly as our panelists are talking about today, there's less maintenance. You're going to not have as big an impact on these storm damages, on fires and things, because you've already done something to mitigate that, and you can focus your operational funding on maintaining the existing system and modernizing it where you can.
And Lisa, for the city of Las Cruces, maintenance is always a question, especially when we're trying these new kinds of pilot projects. The cool corridor we're talking about here, of course, is located within the right-of-way. And so traditionally, right-of-way in the city is maintained by Public Works, those people who know how to pave and asphalt and repair concrete and the like. But of course, this project is dealing with plants, growing, living entities that need different kind of maintenance. And so in this case, it falls to Parks and Recreation Department to maintain the chicanes. This is sort of an ongoing struggle with us and with many communities of exactly how to integrate these kinds of new projects into your maintenance regimes. In this case, there's a real struggle between the people who manage the location, namely the right-of-way, and the people who manage and maintain the facility, the plants, the actual growing item that we're trying to improve the neighborhood with. So we have struggled quite a bit with that, and it's going to be an ongoing struggle, as maintenance always is with these kinds of projects. How do you maintain it so that you maximize the benefits and minimize the budget required to make it happen? So we definitely struggle with it. We found a solution in the meantime, but we'll see as these kinds of projects become more the norm. We'll have to see how that works its way out.
Another quick point to add in that is that there's a lot of workforce development that's coming with the resiliency, and I think green jobs is an opportunity for us. We give temporary jobs to people at the shelter to help with cleanup and general maintenance in the park. So this might be an ability for us to develop other skill sets for them.
Great. So we've had a couple of questions about the engagement processes, and so that tells me that that's what people want to hear about. So I'm going to kind of combine a couple of them together. So maybe if you all, I think, could you talk about sort of some of the methods that you used to get input and engagement? I think we heard a little bit about that from Las Cruces, but also, was there diversity in those who responded, or did you take any other steps in that engagement to sort of bring kind of an equity lens more broadly into the project design? So I'll just go back to Bob again first, just since we just heard from Las Cruces.
Well, thank you. I think there's really kind of two parts to this equation. Everything in California has a public process, very transparent, and our agency has its own processes. So for fuels management, we spent 5 years developing a plan, more than 5 years developing a plan and doing public hearings and getting public participation. What sometimes happened was that is you work for public agencies is there are organized groups that have a bigger voice than the general public. And some of those groups have very strong positions on environmental, they don't touch anything or do more. And, we had proposals to do clear cutting of all the forests in the East Bay. We had proposals to don't do anything. And so you have to navigate that. One of the things that's really helped the Park District, as I mentioned earlier, is actually go to the general public in your area and do a scientific poll, because you start to realize that the controversies you're hearing in the public meetings are not shared by the broader public. They want to see overwhelmingly, they want something done about climate mitigation. They want something done about fuel. They're scared with these fires in California. So it's just really important to have that public engagement, but also make sure you're listening to everyone, including those people that, you know, frankly, those people living next to the parks are more affluent than the people who are living down in what we call the flatter areas along the bay. You need to make sure you have all voices heard. So when we do the polling, we actually look at the demographics, we look at all the questions we can ask to see where people really, what they're really thinking, and that's very helpful. But public engagement from start to finish is absolutely essential and required in California, both for the environmental CEQA process. Our fuels plan was about 5 inches thick and had all the mitigation requirements, had all the responses to comments. So public process and transparency builds trust, but you also have to balance that with who is engaged and who isn't engaged.
So, Lisa, maybe you can talk about this more, but we had a very robust public input process for the city of Las Cruces for this particular project, and engaged several times with the neighbors, inviting them to different kinds of events and gathering input in various different ways. Lisa, you want to carry on with that?
Yeah, I think that was a real intention of ours. I mean, one, it was CDBG funding, so we knew that we were targeting a neighborhood that needed some additional support. But we also brought in a nonprofit group that was a community group that spent a lot of extra time just getting involved in smaller projects. They painted murals. We had a community school that's in that area too, that provides wraparound service of meals and clothes and healthcare and for the whole neighborhood. And so they helped and came out one of the days and did jazzercise, and there was an art project and things like that. So we were really tried, and so we tried to make it more of a neighborhood party than a serious input process. But we also looked at census data to see where these problems that existed and then triangulated it with the surveys. So we've been really intentional about looking at the equity issues and not only dealing with the cool corridors, but also another project area that we're going to go in is to try to remediate some of those houses that have inadequate HVAC systems. So equity, I mean, these communities are the frontline communities that get impacted the most. So we are very, that's where our energies are going, is towards those communities.
Great. Well, thanks to all the panelists. In the interest of time, I think that needs to be our last question. I'd like to thank the speakers for joining us today and for sharing so much good information about how to access and navigate these various funding opportunities and how you planned your projects. And making your communities more resilient in the face of climate change. You can visit the events tab at cityparksalliance.org for information on some future webinars. And if you have questions, additional questions, you can reach out to speakers directly at the emails on the screen. Once again, want to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for their sponsorship of this 2020 funding webinar series. Just a little bit of news, the City Parks Alliance postponed its 2021 Greater and Greener Conference in Philadelphia to the summer of 2022, but they're going to be hosting a virtual summer series in 2021 with educational sessions and networking as a prelude to an in-person conference again in 2022. So again, stay tuned for more information about that event as it becomes available. I know there was a question in the chat about getting the copies of the slides and the presentation. So I think within a couple of days, 48 hours, you'll receive an email with links to today's recordings, some other resources and instructions on how to get your continuing education credits for AICP. But mostly I want to thank everyone, all the attendees today for joining us. Please take a minute to fill out the short evaluation that should pop up when this session concludes. And I hope you can all keep up the great work that you're doing for your communities and for our nation's urban parks. Thanks.